nothing to do with Medicare fraud. You know, Medicare, for somebody who's eligible for Medicare, you know, Medicare pays for what is called ordinary and necessary medical treatment. Whether or not you have a gun has nothing to do with ordinary and necessary medical treatment, period. Whether you have 3 square meals a day may have something to do with Medicare or ordinary and necessary medical treatment, but that should only come, you know, into play if the patient comes in looking like she's malnourished, she might not be eating properly. Then what their diet is, I think, is a legitimate medical question. But you know, this definitely wouldn't apply to your mother, but there was one of the things that came, you know, out of the Department of Health and Human Services was how many times do you have sex in a week? And I guess unless you're asking for a Viagra prescription, then maybe that doesn't have anything to do with Medicare either. So, but you know, that also, in my opinion, is none of Medicare's business unless it relates to some type of medical condition.
But are you hearing that, how should I say, the government is gathering this information and, I don't know, storing it in some warehouse for, I don't know what reason, but who knows?
Well, you know, you may know that I've, you know, really been on the back of the NSA for their bulk collection of everybody's phone and email and text records, and I have a bill in to stop that. You know, they do like to get more information than they need, the NSA employee. Now, I heard that they were fired, but they also ought to be prosecuted for that. But you know, even the Director of Intelligence admitted that he lied to Congress, and he isn't being prosecuted. And I said he ought to be fired and prosecuted because lying to Congress is a federal offense. There's no way we can do oversight without truthful testimony, just like witnesses are sworn in before they testify in court, because the courts can't do their job unless there's truthful testimony. Who's next?
I got a question.
Sure.
About the bill you introduced, the Voting Rights Act bill.
Mm-hmm.
In the legislation, it seems to contain language that explicitly removes white people from the protections of the Voting Rights Act.
That does not do that.
It doesn't.
You know, and one of the things that the Voting Rights Act has always looked at is that if minority turnout is lower than average, then there's extra scrutiny by the Justice Department. What the bill does is it says that if there's discrimination against white people, which may happen in certain heavily black areas, then there would be extra scrutiny on that. But there's nothing that is targeting people by race in the Voting Rights Act.
But the bill says the term minority means person of a, quote, race other than white, unquote.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't that be the racialist language that you just said isn't in the bill?
No.
That language doesn't exist in the bill?
The language does exist in the bill. I would dispute that it's racialist.
Okay, so, but you're saying the bill does not have language other than white. You're saying that that is not racialist language.
What that does is it says that if there's discrimination against whites, that's treated the same way as discrimination against blacks.
Have you heard of the Brown case in Mississippi where your bill would leave those white voters without protection even though the Fifth Circuit ruled that they were discriminated against? So,
you know, it doesn't do that, and the bill is constitutional, and Eric Holder, who opposes my bill, says the bill is constitutional.
it just seems like this is like you're doing the work of Eric Holder and the race hustlers with this language in the bill.
No, I dispute that. You know, the Voting Rights Act, I think, has been the most successful of all of the 1950s and 1960s era Civil Rights Act. And, you know, it has enfranchised minorities in the South, and minorities are not only blacks but also Republicans. Because before that, the black racist legislators did redistricting that prevented Republicans from being elected at all levels from Congress on down. And, you know, I can say that the Voting Rights Act and what has happened, you know, has helped the Republicans get control of the House of Representatives. I don't want to go back to the bad old days for a partisan purpose, as well. Now, that being said, what this bill does is it takes away the pre-clearance from half the states that are currently under pre-clearance, and it gives the other states, and there are only 4 that are left, a way to get out of pre-clearance in 10 years. Also, one of the criticisms of the previous Voting Rights Act is that it was not national in application. This bill is national in application, and if a state commits 5 infractions, then they're brought under pre-clearance regardless of where they are. One of those pre-clearance, or one of those infractions has to be a statewide pre-clearance. And the good part about the Voting Rights Act is that modernization is that I got a provision in there that basically gets Eric Holder out of going after photo ID laws that I think are essential to preserve the integrity of the ballot box.
But the law still can be used to block photo ID in places like Texas and South Carolina. It only exempts photo ID from counting against the number of strikes a state get, but you could still, the bill could still be used by Holder to put pressure on the state.
Well, no, it can't. The existing Voting Rights Act, part of which was not declared unconstitutional, allows Holder under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to go after anybody. So he can go after anybody, but the standard that has to be utilized for a Section 2 violation is much higher than for a Section 4 violation or a Section 5 violation. So it's going to be really tough for Holder to go after states with photo IDs and win in court. But if he does win in court, it doesn't count to bring the state under the pre-clearance law.
Congressman,
And that, I do it one at a time, sir. That, sir, has been a huge concession on the part of the civil rights community, and having that provision in the Voting Rights Act has shut them up on photo ID. You've noticed that since the bill has been introduced, Holder can continue yapping because he doesn't like the bill and opposed to it, but you don't see any of the civil rights community complaining about photo ID anymore. Yes, sir.
Congressman, do you understand why your role in that bill would raise questions, being that it received praise in a press release from the SEIU and the Mexican Americans Legal Defense Organization?
Well, again, the fact is that I believe that the implementation of the Voting Rights Act, has allowed more Republicans to be elected in the South. I don't think the SEIU and the Mexican American Legal Defense Foundation, really appreciates that. But, the fact of the matter remains is that I think that there's going to be some kind of a bill that will be passed, and this is going to be the best bill in terms of getting the Voting Rights Act phased out as quickly as possible. It's gone in 5 of the 9 states. It can be gone in the other 4 if they have no more violations, because the trigger for Section 5 is a rolling 15-year violation. Rolling 15-year violation standard, and as soon as you get under the number of 5, then pre-clearance ends.
Why, though, did you work with an ACLU lobbyist in the writing of this bill?
Frankly, I think it's the right thing to do. I don't think that Republicans, should be running around saying that we want to deny the right to vote to anybody and to prevent their vote from being effectively counted. I don't,
Who's saying that, though?
Well, I'm saying that I think that the right to vote, is key to having a functional democracy. And when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, one of my subcommittees had a whole string of hearings in a 15,000-page record that showed that, particularly in Texas and Georgia, there still were games being played to prevent minorities from voting. And that's wrong. Minorities should not be prevented from voting. Nobody should be prevented from voting.
But don't you think this gives the federal government more power to play their games in state elections?
Well, the federal government already has that power under Section 2, which was not touched by the Supreme Court decision. What was touched by the Supreme Court decision was Section 4, which was the trigger to bring people under pre-clearance. My bill, what it does is it redefines Section 4 in a constitutional manner, and it does it in a way that takes away half the states that are currently, that were under pre-clearance, from pre-clearance, and it gives the other 4 states a way to get out of it within a 10-year period of time. Once they get out of it, you know, then there isn't going to be a Voting Rights Act, rather than having the Voting Rights Act go on forever and ever. Meaning the only reason that a state is under pre-clearance is that they do have violations. No violations, no pre-clearance.
I'm just still concerned about the fact that the bill excludes certain races from protection. That's what concerns me.
I think what I can tell you is I think it expands protections to whites.
It says other than white in the bill.
I think the way it's drafted is that it expands protections to whites.
But it says the opposite.
Well, the way legislative bills are drafted, you know, when it says other than whites, you know, that was what one of the triggers were. But there's a way that if whites are discriminated against by election judges in municipalities that are heavily non-white, you know, then they ought to get the protection of the Voting Rights Act just as if it's done the other way around. Now, if it needs to be fixed up, we can fix that up. But those protections ought to apply to everybody because they're constitutional protections under the 13th and 15th Amendments.
What needs to be fixed up, you said?
I said if it needs to be fixed up.
That language, racial language?
If it needs to be fixed up, it can be fixed up.
Who would fix it up?
It would be fixed up in the Judiciary Committee.
Speaking of this bill, it seemed like there was some confusion about the nature of Congressman Cantor's support of this legislation. Do you want to clear that up?
Well, he'd have to answer this by himself. I have been working with Congressman Cantor, and he knows what I've been doing right from the beginning of the negotiations. And what I will say is that the wish list that we got from Eric Holder was 122 pages, and this is a 22-page bill. You know, my efforts got 100 pages out of it.
Okay, it's just that Cantor's staff said that his office was his role in this was misrepresented by your office.
No, it was not misrepresented.
Okay. Any comment on why they would have said it?
Well,
their position was misrepresented?
They're going to have to speak for themselves on it.
Fair enough.
I don't put words in colleagues' mouths, and definitely colleague staff's mouths. Anybody else?
Would this be, how should I say, this time would be just questions directed to you?
Oh, if anybody wants to.
This is our state representative, Mark Warren.
Yeah.
So if you have any state questions, I have a couple about elections, but you go, everybody else go first.
If I may ask one more, sir. The NSA was brought up before, and I believe most Americans would agree that the NSA was doing some serious overreach and it doesn't help that their head light Congress. I'd like to know what your opinion is on the man who started all this, Edward Snowden. Is he a hero or is he a traitor to the country? And if he did come back here, which we don't know if he ever will, should he face prosecution? How do you
I think he is neither a traitor nor a hero. I think he is a criminal. You know, he did disclose classified information, which is a crime. He also violated the contract that he had signed with his employer in disclosing the information. So he's been indicted. Our government has requested Vladimir Putin to send him back to face justice. Vladimir Putin is Vladimir Putin, and he's still enjoying Mr. Putin's hospitality.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Bourne or more for me?
This has to do with voting. And we had our Towns Association statewide district meeting on Saturday. And Len Edelman was there talking about a bill that he is looking to get support on. And that would be that, I don't know if everybody's aware, but there's, you can do in-person absentee voting within a within a 2-week period of time before the election. You call me, we'll meet here, you come, you vote. It's an absentee ballot. But what that is, you call me to make the appointment. But in Madison and Milwaukee, when it comes to big elections, they're open hours and hours, Saturdays, Sundays. He was looking at a bill to regulate more, that it would be just like years ago, polls used to open at all different times, more uniform hours for in-person voting. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I would support
So it's
that.
all equal.
We have a bill that has already passed the Assembly that defines the hours more clearly for in-person absentee. It's in the Senate now. I don't know whether they're going to take it up or not. But we passed that last fall already because I think it's important to have some more consistency in that. So it's definitely something I would support.
Okay, and then another question about late arriving absentee ballots. I'm not sure if you're aware here, I send you an absentee ballot. As long as it's postmarked by the Tuesday of the election, your ballot still has till 4 o'clock Friday, which will be 3 days later, for it to come. I'm not saying military, that's totally different, right, George? Totally different. I'm just saying, why is this? Why do we have this late arriving for, I'm not saying take the military out. Why do we have this?
I guess this is the first time I've ever been asked that one. I mean, I'm assuming there has to be some sort of standard to allow for the appropriate processing through the mail, through the U.S. mail. I mean,
so it can come till 4 o'clock on Friday, and then the clerks call a canvass, so the town has to, it doesn't cost a lot of money, but then I have to have people come here to do a canvass. Even if it didn't arrive, they have to sign a form that says it didn't arrive. And if it did arrive, there's lots of paperwork. I guess I just don't understand
you
that.
still would have to do the board of canvass is still going to have to approve the full, all the ballots, the count.
The county would be doing it. Not our own. Like we just had the high school.
Right.
And I had 5 ballots out, and then we got together at 5 o'clock on Friday night to say that, to sign the papers that no ballots came.
Okay. What would be your recommendation, I guess, for a better system? You're still going to have, as long as you have absentee ballots by mail, you're still going to have a.
But I'm saying if the election's on Tuesday, the ballot could be here on Tuesday.
So
I sent them a month before that, and they still didn't come because evidently, for whatever reason, they didn't. Some came back and some didn't.
I think because of the differences in how long it takes to mail sometimes, the postmark is something that you can stand by to say, you know, this is a date certain, a time certain type of thing. And if you don't have that standard, I'm not sure how you would, you know, how would you keep the he said, she said stuff, but well, I mailed it last Thursday, I don't know why you didn't get it by Tuesday or whatever the case might be.
But how do we do that before we had this? Which came, I don't know what, before your time.
Right. I don't, like I said, this is the first time I've
absentee
been
ballots
asked.
had to be back before the polls closed on election day.
Correct.
Yeah,
And now it has
rules
till
system.
4 o'clock on Friday.
And there wasn't an exception for military ballots because of the deployment overseas and the fact that getting things back from places like Afghanistan and Iraq sometimes takes a while.
I worked with George with that,
You know,
yeah.
there was a federal law, you know, on that that said that military ballots, as long as the postmark was before the election, could be counted, even if it took a month to come back.
I understand
But
that.
that would only happen if there was a close election and a contest and a recall.
Mhm. And that also was a question I was supposed to ask from Karen Gibson, our county clerk.
Okay.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me. I just have a comment for you, Representative Sensenbrenner. I am concerned about a particular matter what I feel is injustice, mostly between Eric Holder and what he's been bringing about. It's my understanding that today the U.S. Supreme Court is going to be deciding whether or not they will be taking up the Mikey case. Is that one that you're familiar with?
Peripherally, I'm not intimately familiar with that case.
It's my understanding that this family several years ago applied for amnesty and was granted amnesty by a judge based on their convictions. They had convictions to home educate their own children in Germany, and they pretty much fled Germany for to be able to come here. They were granted protection by this judge, but then later Eric Holder decided that he didn't like that. And it kind of reminds me of mob-style politics to go after one particular
First of all, Mr. Holder, you know, let me tell you that I think I was the first congressman to call for his resignation. Every time he's appeared before the Judiciary Committee, I have asked him rather pointed questions, and when he hasn't answered them, I've stated my opinion. And Holder has been the first sitting cabinet member that has been cited for contempt of Congress. I voted for that, and I would do it again on that. Now, for someone to ask for asylum or to come as a refugee, they have to have, quote, a well-founded fear of political or religious persecution if they return to their home country. And whether one has that or not, it depends upon a finding by a judge. Now, my guess is that the judge that Holder reversed was not a third branch of government judge, but an administrative judge who works for the Justice Department. So the final say on that would, under the law, would end up being the Attorney General's. And the Attorney General also has power under the immigration law to parole people into the United States at his discretion. Now, I think that the appeal is a legitimate appeal. I am a strong supporter of homeschooling as well as school vouchers, you know, as a way of providing educational choice for parents who wish to avail themselves of those kinds of choices rather than being forced into public education, whether it is here or whether it is somewhere else in the world. And I would hope that they would win their case. And I think that what Holder did in this case is, you know, another case of, you know, him making a mistake or advancing an agenda that I don't think is the proper one. But he's also opposed to my voting rights bill. Sometimes politics make strange bedfellows. Last one before I go to the Osho.
Well, speaking of strange bedfellows and Holder, I'm concerned about your bill giving Holder the power to place states under federal observer coverage a lot easier than they would be able to.
It does not do that. It actually takes away powers that he has had, and that's why he and the administration are against it. Now, the 100 pages that I ended up negotiating out of the bill did give him additional powers, but the bill that was introduced does not do that. Now, the Voting Rights Act has been a federal intervention under extraordinary circumstances, and the Supreme Court did not say that could not be done last year, as well as in their previous upholdings of the Civil Rights Act, of the Voting Rights Act. With photo ID, with how the trigger works, you know, how the fact that there have to be judicially determined ways to count, and the 5 counts within 15 years to bring a state or a jurisdiction under the Voting Rights Act coverage. There's a way to get out of Voting Rights Act coverage for those jurisdictions that are still underneath it without the Justice Department intervening at all. It's just behaving themselves, and it's basically over a 10-year period, because some of these violations have been more than 10 years old.
But doesn't it allow Holder to impose observer coverage without courts? Because it used to be that courts had to impose it,
He has that
but
power
now
under existing law. It's not under the Voting Rights Act, and he can send election observers in anywhere. But the fact is that pre-clearance of election law procedures, that's what the Supreme Court addressed. That's what they found unconstitutional, and they found unconstitutional not the subject of pre-clearance, but the trigger by which a jurisdiction was brought under pre-clearance. Now, what my bill does is that it makes pre-clearance in the constitutional way that gets half the jurisdictions that were previously under pre-clearance out immediately, and gives the other jurisdictions a way to get out by their own accord without the Justice Department sticking its big nose into it.
So, but wasn't your staff working with Holder's legislative affairs on this bill?
Certainly my staff was, but when you negotiate things out of bills. You should have seen the wish list that he handed me. Even former Congressman Mel Watt, who was a black from North Carolina, who has now been appointed housing czar by the president, looked at the wish list that Holder gave me, and it was reversing every favorable decision that the court had given to a jurisdiction against the Justice Department in the last 10 or 15 years, and said that was a no-go.
Well,
come on, give me a little credit for doing
it's just a
some
little
stuff.
concerning when it's something that the SEIU is calling a quote good first step, and you're working with the ACLU lobbyists
and the next step and the next step and the next step. They would like to amend it to make it stronger, and I'm here to say deal's a deal. We're not going to make it stronger, and I don't care what the SEIU, or the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, has to say on this. This is a negotiated compromise, and a negotiated compromise does not mean that people on both sides pick what falls off the table during the negotiation, and try to override it.
But on your side, you were working with an ACLU lobbyist.
So what?
That you don't.
So what?
You don't think that would be disturbing to constituents and donors?
Well, it might be disturbing to constituents and donors, but on the same side, I've been working with an ACLU lobbyist to rein in the NSA with the Freedom Act. They're for the Freedom Act too. Mm-hmm. And from your line of questions, I think you guys are as well. Right?
We're working. I'm sorry, what?
I said you guys are for the Freedom Act as well, to rein in the USA to stop their bulk collection.
Yeah, we're addressing this bill.
Well, but you're saying that talking to the ACLU is a bad thing to do. I'm saying I'm talking to the ACLU and seeking their support. A bill that seems to grant more power to the federal government to intervene.
Getting support from Common Cause and getting support from the SEIU is troubling. These are strange bedfellows to have as someone who.
Well, what I'm saying is the 92 amendments, or the 82 amendments to the Voting Rights Act is what gave Republicans control of the House of Representatives and many southern state legislators, because you don't have any conservative Democrats who vote with Pelosi all the time left. They've been replaced by Republicans. And I'll plead guilty to that, too. Okay. Thanks for coming.
This was wonderful to have you all come this morning. It was great.
forward-looking.
No, I'm in my right mind, believe me.
Army cut that.
Right.
Does that affect only that branch of the armed services? Or does that affect the entire,
It affects,
process?
it affects the entire DOT.
Okay, and, what positive things as a conservative can I see from that? Help me with that, because I don't understand.
Well,
I know that we're de-escalating troop occupation in a variety of areas.
well, I'll tell you that the sequestration, which the omnibus significantly changed. That was the idea of Jacob Lew, who at that time was Obama's budget director, and has now been promoted to be Secretary of the Treasury. And he was told that this was a bad idea, even by Democrats. But the insistence of the Obama administration was that half would come out of the Defense Department, half would come out of appropriated dollars in other areas, and none would come out of entitlements. And that was part of the deal that raised the debt ceiling and kept the government open in August of 11. It has been changed so that the defense cuts are not as deep, but there still are cuts.
Well, I'll talk to Dennis.
And the thing is, you know, we can't exempt any part of the budget, you know, when we're
you care.
running trillion.
They don't.
Excuse me, sir. Folks. No, the meeting's closed. The meeting's going on, so if you can take your conversations elsewhere, if you want to do that. You know, the thing is that there have to be some cuts across the board. The Defense Department can't be exempt.
Okay, if you don't mind me serendipity here. We lost an ambassador, and variety of the media outlets are doing that because they said they are really mouthpieces for Hillary, saying what doesn't matter anymore. The investigation is not complete yet, as I understand. Is that correct?
The investigation is not complete, you know. However, the Republicans have put up the 1,800 pages of documents that have been turned over both to the Senate and the House, you know, on gop.gov/Benghazi. So the 1,800 pages, you know, are, you know, up on the internet. Anybody can look at them. But again, it's not complete. And what I can say is that Mrs. Clinton, if she wants to be president, is going to have to come up with a better answer to what her involvement was in Benghazi and why two things didn't happen. Why the pleas of the people on the ground there for more security were rejected by the State Department. And then when the attack took place, why the military assets that are not very far away in Italy were not, you know, immediately dispatched to protect our ambassador and the other Americans who were on the ground.
Okay. I understand that there were some on-the-scene witnesses to that, and that they have been told not to talk about this. Is that correct?
They were told not to talk about it. Some of them are talking about it to investigators of the House Government Oversight and Government Reform Committee.
No one over there has been held accountable for that.
You know, well, I don't think that, you know, there was anybody who was accountable for the act that was either in the embassy. I think the problem is that the State Department dropped the ball, and you know, it now is, you know, very evident that the story that they put on the Sunday talk shows the Sunday after the attack, that this was something that was spontaneous, that was triggered by a video that somebody put up on the internet, was a complete fabrication.
Right. Obviously, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about, and that is this recently Department of Justice, sirs, is not acting in good faith.
Well, I agree with that, and what I can say is that Eric Holder was the first sitting cabinet member that was found in contempt of Congress for his failure to turn over the subpoenaed documents in Fast and Furious. I voted to cite Mr. Holder for contempt. I would do it again.
I hope something could be done there.
Well, the problem that's done is that the Congress cannot force to jail anybody because that's a bill of attainder and that's unconstitutional. So when somebody is cited for contempt of Congress, it's up to the Justice Department to take the case to court and prosecute that person. And the Justice Department has not been very eager to prosecute the boss, even though they've been directed to do so by Congress. And I guess what really makes me angry is that Mr. Holder decides what laws he is going to defend and what laws he is not.
Like someone in the White House.
Yes,
And changes the laws.
yeah, but the fact is that his job and the oath that he took to faithfully discharge his office does not allow him to pick and choose what laws are to be represented and what laws are not to be represented in court. They are laws that were passed by the Congress and signed by the President.
Okay, I've occupied enough of your time. I'll let somebody else talk.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
I am wondering, why did you vote against Ron Johnson when he said that accepting senators from having to apply with Obamacare?
Well, the thing is that all Republicans voted against Obamacare in total. There is a provision in Obamacare that says that senators and members of the House and their staffs are the only federal employees that are required to go under Obamacare. I am under Obamacare as a result of that law. The President, his czars, nobody in the executive branch, including his political employees, are under Obamacare. They are under the old federal insurance program. Senator Johnson was not in Congress at the time Obamacare passed. There was no Republican that voted for Obamacare in either house of Congress. That was the Pelosi Congress, where both houses were controlled by the Democrats, and they narrowly got it through both houses. So the information you got is not correct. It's exactly the opposite. Who's next? Yes, sir.
Is there anything going on behind the scenes with the gun effort?
No. There's nothing going on behind the scenes. The President keeps on calling for gun control. The Senate last year rejected the President's call, and this was the Democratic-controlled Senate rejecting the President's call. So what I can say is that, sometimes we Republicans are accused of not being effective. It's Republicans that have stopped gun control, and we will continue to do that.
I know in the Constitution it says that we have the right to bear arms and protect ourselves against the government. And when you see that,
that's why James Madison put the Second Amendment in the Constitution, and why the Supreme Court has upheld challenges to erode Second Amendment rights, most recently in the case of the law that prohibited people from having guns in D.C. in their homes.
and how about this Soros that's put forth an effort to blast Walker? Doesn't this Soros own a bunch of ammo manufacturing plants?
I don't know what Mr. Soros' investments are, but he has funded the left repeatedly for the last decade or so, and he has every right to do that just as much as people fund the right. The ones who fund the right are the ones that seem to be criticized the most. But I just look at, I didn't see the governor's appearances on the Sunday morning talk shows because I usually get angry when I watch them. So it is best to leave the TV off, at that time. But there are all these kinds of gotcha questions that are asked by those folks, and the governor had to field one or two of them yesterday.
Excuse me, I'd like to
let me go through the audience and let everybody who hasn't asked one, chance that, you asked one in Rubicon, so you're at the end of the list.
Well,
You're
it's
at
sort
the
of
end
a
of the list,
follow-up
sir.
to
You
an
asked
answer that
one
you
in
gave me.
Rubicon, so, anybody from Exonia that would like to ask some?
What about the lack of ammunition on the shelves yet? It seems to be pretty scarce.
Well, the law has been changed on the lack of ammunition on the shelves, and that is that there has to be an announcement ahead of time on when a government agency makes a bulk purchase of ammunition, and if the Congress wants to hold a hearing on that, they have the opportunity to do so before the bulk purchase takes place. Bulk purchases are generally cheaper than individual purposes. I guess, the question that I had is why the Department of Homeland Security is doing the bulk purchases when in the past that's been done by the General Services Administration.
There's a lot of hoarding going on too.
Well,
The
answer is yeah, whenever there's a real or apparent shortage, there's a lot of hoarding going on, and that's when I look back at one of the reasons why the Soviet Union fell apart was because when there was a shipment of some necessary product that came in, people hoarded it and then sold it on the black market, and that we shouldn't be doing. But I don't think this is going to happen again. I know that ammunition manufacturers put extra employees and some of them extra shifts on when all of a sudden they got cleaned out, both by the bulk purchase as well as by the hoarding.
Why was the government buying so much?
They said it was a bulk purchase that was going to be, the savings were going to be shared with state and local law enforcement and other federal law enforcement agencies. But, I don't criticize bulk purchases, I criticized who did it. And, this is something that should have been done by the GSA. They have bulk purchases of pencils and furniture and stuff like that, because it is a lot cheaper than, if you have each office or each agency buying the stuff one at a time. Yes,
We're
ma'am.
here from Fort Atkinson, and it's more with the private request, so I don't know if you will have time afterwards.
Sure, I will just end, this meeting is supposed to end at 11:45, and I'll end it maybe 8 minutes earlier so that I can get the information down to help you out. Okay, guys, what do you want to ask now? You have a question.
I have a multitude of questions.
Go ahead.
Starting with the fact that I'm 81 years old, and our heat in our thermostat in our house for the entire winter has been set at 59.
Mm-hmm.
And we received a oil bill for $1,682 in January. I'm expecting another one in a week or so.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering.
You're on oil and not on propane?
On oil.
Okay.
Oil. It was 18 cents a gallon when we moved in.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I was wondering why the federal government cut back on, we had been on some of the heat from the government for the last 3 years. Why it was cut back by 2/3 this year?
Everything was cut back significantly. The problem I have had with the federal government's heating program is that some of that money goes as far south as Puerto Rico for air conditioning, and air conditioning, in my opinion, it's a convenience, not a necessity, whereas heating is a necessity. But again, with the heating program, it's not just heating. It goes to some pretty warm states as well, and not as much goes to pretty cold states like ours. The other thing is that the law of supply and demand hits practically everything, and the demand has gone up because this winter has been so cold.
No, I understand
and we're not done yet, from what I read from.
No, we're not.
Yeah.
But from what I understand and from what I hear on the news, I mean, the federal government has all this money going to Egypt. It is sending money overseas to rebuild foreign mosques. Why isn't this staying here for the people in this country?
Well,
why are we? And you guys are in charge of the purse strings.
Well, let me say that I have never voted for a general foreign aid bill since I've been in Congress. However, foreign aid is somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 to 30 to 40 billion dollars out of a $4 trillion budget. So in terms of a percentage of the total budget, it is really quite low. But again, I don't support that kind of stuff. The domestic programs, particularly the stimulus program that went way up when the president decided that he was going to borrow money and send the bill to our children and grandchildren, basically to support the current generation's needs. The deficits were getting out of control, and the Federal Reserve has been printing up money in what's called quantitative easing. That's going to increase the money supply, and sooner or later we're going to get into some pretty wicked inflation. And the first people that get hurt with inflation are senior citizens living on fixed income and people who are dependent upon various types of government benefit programs that end up becoming worth less and less as the purchasing power of the dollar goes down and down.
Regarding that inflation, I understand that the price of food is not included in that statistic for inflation. I mean, food has gone up exponentially.
Yeah, it is, but the price of energy goes up and down, and when the price of energy goes down, as it will when the cold weather is over with, then the total inflation figures, which is called the Consumer Price Index, that's not going to show, an inflationary movement. The price of food goes up because, frankly, this administration, is trying to make energy more expensive. It has declared a war on coal. We have all kinds of regulations relative to the type of fertilizers that the farmers have to use, and that doesn't come for nothing either. So what I think is it's kind of a backdoor tax increase, and there has to be some regulation, but there should be a cost-benefit analysis that is objective. And if the cost is far more than the benefit, then the regulation should not be imposed upon the consuming public.
Well, I have other questions, but I don't know if I have to wait another turn.
Go ahead.
Okay. I guess I'm wondering why the federal government hasn't stepped in and done some, in several areas, some legislation. There's all this talk about the FCC going into the newsrooms. If you were to cut off the budget to the FCC, they wouldn't be able to do that.
Well, they haven't gone into the newsrooms.
They haven't yet, but
I don't know why they would want to go into the newsrooms, because the mainstream media is so biased anyhow.
Well, they want it more biased, I believe. And
how can that be the case?
You're right. The other thing is that Obama, a couple of weeks ago, I heard that Obama was going to sign this executive order for the EPA to start all these things against the energy companies. And after that announcement was made, they interviewed a fellow from his administration who was involved in this sort of thing. And that gentleman told us over the air that the price of electricity will go up 70 to 80%.
Well,
that would make my electric bill $775 to $825 a month.
Now, this is the whole business about global warming and climate change.
There is none.
Well, I agree there is none. Just walk outside without your coat on and you'll find that out pretty quickly. When Gingrich was Speaker, he named me the chief of the congressional delegation to go over to Japan when Al Gore's Kyoto Protocol was being negotiated. And I went there as a climate change skeptic. I left there as a climate change opponent. The Kyoto Protocol, which put together a cap and trade type thing, which I called cap and tax, had nothing to do with the environment. It had everything to do with exporting wealth from the United States and other first world countries to quote, developing countries like China and India. Well, they've developed an awful lot, and they've become, you know, great competitors of us, particularly in the area of manufactured and consumer goods. And I spent, you know, 13 years going around, literally going around the world, arguing against this treaty, and I'm happy to tell you it's dead. In the Democrat Congress, the cap and trade bill passed the House narrowly. It was rejected in the Democrat Senate. Now what Obama is trying to do is to bring in cap and trade by administration or administrative regulation through the back door of the EPA. That's unconstitutional in my opinion, and the Congress is going to fight that even to the extent of cutting the appropriations for the EPA so they don't have the money to enforce whatever regulation they have.
That was going to be my next question. Why aren't you cutting that and the appropriations to the FCC and the appropriations to Common Core, which is destroying this country?
Well,
they're
you know,
dumbing down all the kids already.
the thing is that in Wisconsin, the locally elected school board has the authority, complete authority over curriculum, textbooks, and methods of instruction within their school district, and that cannot be overridden either by state legislation unless the legislature wishes to change the law, or by a federal government edict, and that's the way it ought to be. I'm all in favor of local control of schools, and if Common Core is to be instituted in the Economowoc School District, it will be your elected school board that does it. So those school board meetings can be very important.
I thought it was implemented unilaterally by Tony Evers.
Wait a minute, sir. She has got the floor.
Thank you. If the government wouldn't keep throwing money from Common Core at all the states so that they would be inclined to accept that program, maybe something in the states would turn around.
Well, again, I told you what the state law is. We
Yeah.
have an elected superintendent of public instruction named Evers that is all for Common Core. I didn't vote for him in the 2 elections that he ran in, but he did win. But again, the state superintendent has limited power over local school boards, and if local school boards dig their heels in and says no Common Core here, the state law says that they are to approve methods of instruction, and Common Core is a method of instruction. Okay, I'll give you guys about 5 minutes so I have some time to see these folks.
Okay, well, earlier this morning, regarding the Voting Rights Act, you had stated that you had successfully brought the amount of states that are under judicial or under federal control down to 4.
Mm-hmm.
My concern is that 4 is going to become 8, 8 is going to become 12, up and up and up, given the folks that you're working with on this. For instance, the ACLU lobbyist. I have a picture of you with Wade Henderson of the Soros-funded leadership conference. And you know, when you're working in concert with people who actively want to bring infractions upon states, sue states, in order to bring them, systematically bring them under the holder's control, I mean, don't you think that is...
It will be much harder to do that, and you know, and I reject insinuations of guilt by association. Mr. Henderson has been working for the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights long before George Soros got involved in left-wing activities. And you know, what I can say is that you know, the legislation which I have introduced with Mr. Conyers again reduces the number of states under pre-clearance by 4. Or by 5. It goes from 9 to 4. The 4 states that are under pre-clearance are those that have had a record of multiple infractions over the last 15 years. The way they get out of being under pre-clearance is by not having infractions. So there is an incentive to do that. Now, under the old Section 5, which was not held unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, there is a very difficult method for them to bail out of federal supervision and federal pre-clearance. Now it's just automatic if there are no violations. I think that that's a step forward.
But more violations are going, I mean, there's an incentive, I mean, you're conservative, you understand these people. You know, there is an incentive to systematically bring more infractions on the state and make them vulnerable
limit the authority of an attorney general that is compliant with, quote, those people, unquote. That's what this bill does, and that's why Mr. Holder is not in favor of it.
Does he say that publicly or privately?
Yes, I don't know if he said it publicly, but he was asked by, quote, those people to endorse the bill after the compromise was reached, and he has refused to do it.
So he said it privately. Holder came out against your bill privately.
Well, if he's against the bill, he's against the bill.
Where did he say it privately? Did he talk to you? Are you talking?
He has not said it privately to me. He said it privately to other people who have told me about that. I imagine if he was asked by somebody at a press conference whether or not he supported the bill, he would not endorse it.
Will the president sign the bill if Holder won't?
Well, I hope the president vetoes the bill.
You hope the president vetoes your bill?
If the president vetoes, well, let me rephrase that. If the president vetoes this bill, he will lose an awful lot of the African-American support that he has.
I see.
Because the civil rights organizations support the bill.
Now, it doesn't sound like
the president and his attorney general don't support the bill. That's up to them to tell us why.
Doesn't sound like
they have not done that.
Doesn't sound like a strong objection if Holder is objecting privately and not publicly to your bill. It sounds like he more or less is going to support this.
I would say an objection is an objection. Now, I think what he's trying to do is to bring back the people who have come out in support of my bill to try to improve it. And you know, there are both sides made concessions in this bill. As far as I'm concerned, I keep my word. A deal is a deal. This is not a change in my position. I've supported Voting Rights Act legislation since 1982, when the first reauthorization came up since my election to Congress.
But one of those 4 states that was mentioned is Texas, is covered. And Texas, you know, recently there were some videos that came out in Texas showing people breaking the law. There's a potentially criminal investigation now into voter fraud in Texas. Why? I mean, do you think that people in Texas are racist or something to want more control, federal control over the state of Texas?
Well, you know, the thing is when we had the hearings in 05 and 06, I would say a good part of the 15,000 pages of testimony were on violations that occurred in Texas and in Georgia.
But have you seen the videos recently? Where it's going to make it harder.
I haven't seen the videos recently. You know, what I can say is that the number of violations that courts have found, this is not the Justice Department, that courts have found, you know, has been enough to bring them under preclearance under my bill. Now, what I can say is that my bill has a way for them to work their way out of preclearance without going on to bended knees to the Justice Department, whether it's headed by Eric Holder or by somebody else.
So you're going to take it out of the courts and put it back on the feds to...
No, it's the courts that make the determination on whether there's been a violation or not.
That used to be the case, but now it seems your bill makes it so that such that Holder can just you know, impose
No, he can't do that. That's you know,
that's what the bill says.
The thing is that when a state was under preclearance in the formula in Section 4, which was passed originally in 1965, had not been amended, in which the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional. This was the trigger for preclearance. Once you were under preclearance, there was a very difficult way to get out of it. And basically, jurisdictions decided it was not worth the effort on it. What my bill does is it says that if you don't have Voting Rights Act violations, and it's a rolling 15-year period, so if you don't have more than 5, one of which has to be a statewide one, in a 15-year period, then you're out of it automatically. You don't have to go to court. You don't have to, you know, go kiss the ring of the Attorney General. you're out of it automatically. So if there are no more violations within 15 years max, and probably more likely 10 years, there will be no more jurisdictions under the Voting Rights Act.
You said that in the...
Okay, now I did say I would spend some time with these folks.
Can we just have one more?
Well,
Just one more.
just one.
Sure. You said in Rubicon, you said that the changes helped the Republicans win elections. I mean, in the South,
The 82 changes did that.
There's already existing voting rights law to protect that status quo. Do we really need to give the federal government more power?
You know,
And why do we want to violate the Constitution to help Republicans win elections?
Well, you know, first of all, the Constitution has not been violated. The Supreme Court, until this last decision, has consistently upheld the Voting Rights Act. And what the Supreme Court said last June was that the trigger was unconstitutional because it was based on figures that occurred in 1965, when it was practically impossible for blacks to register or blacks to cast their votes in the South. And that's what my bill does, is it modernizes that trigger with a 15-year rolling standard. And Holder, even though he doesn't support my bill, does say that that change is constitutional. Now, he might not like the way it's put together, but he has said that it is constitutional. Now, to answer your first question about helping Republicans, before 1982, what Democrat legislatures did in the South is they gerrymandered districts so that there would be enough white votes to win a Democratic primary and enough black votes for the conservative, maybe somewhat racist Democrat to win the general election. And allowing that to continue discriminated against minorities in the South, and the two minorities in the South were Republicans and blacks. And the 82 amendments that was signed by President Reagan ended up saying that that type of redistricting could not continue. Now, you know, it took until 1994 for the Republicans to win control of the House of Representatives, and that was because the 82 amendments to the Voting Rights Act ended up taking effect after most states had redistricted. So the 81, 82 redistricting lasted until 91 and 92. 92 was a Democrat election where Clinton ended up getting elected, and Perot siphoned votes away from George H.W. Bush. In 94, the pendulum swung in the other direction. And that's how the Republicans were helped, but it was discrimination against both blacks and Republicans by what southern states were doing before 1982 that ended up evening the scale. Thank you. Folks, why don't you step up here?
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.